the interior of the new Ford Explorer. And I've explored it plenty with my birthday cake Oreos, and luckily for me it was my birthday about 7 months ago, so I'm still enjoying these. The space that I've looked at is a mixed bag, and much of the entire car, I feel like this was a half-finished project. I don't know if it was because the junior engineers that helped to design it or the senior engineers said we want to do this and Ford said no, but there's certain parts of it I am really impressed with. There's more geometry, the stitching, the leathers, the plastics look much better in some spots than in previous generation Ford products, and that's something I always knock them on. In some cases, this is a way better space. Seats are comfortable. The upper dash is leather and it doesn't feel like a total shit show. The center console, even though the plastics look much more generic here, the knobs, buttons, and switches have some texture to them. They don't look budget basement. Even the HVAC controls are a lot better than they used to be in some of their previous generation cars. But then they go and completely, and this is what I'm talking about, it feels unfinished, they put this fake wood. And it's not that it's fake wood. It's not that it even, you know, some people might think it passes for a real wood, but it's the way that the fit and finishes of these plastics. They don't butt up together properly. It's like rubbing off the texture on the corners of it. It looks like it doesn't fit right. To me, it seems like this was designed to be a rental car or a fleet car first. The modularity is here to where they know, okay, we can switch it out for like 30 cents if we're selling these, a couple 100,000 units of it. And it's more focused on that than being a real finished product. And the best example is when you get out of the new Kia Telluride or Hyundai Palisade, you're going to look at the attention to detail on the interior there. This does not have that. And I feel like that's where you see the difference in mindset of what their goal was. This seems to be made for somebody that is just a complete Ford fanatic, that's always had Fords, that's had Explorers or other products. They don't go and shop around, and Ford knew that people are not going to nitpick this type of stuff. And they said, you know what? Our Ford customers are going to buy it, our fleet customers are going to buy it, and we don't have to go and complete every little piece and every corner of that in here. And that's where it's disappointing to me. All right, next thing to talk about. They've updated the technology in this car, and that's a big thing with their PR marketing. Their new center gauge cluster here is all screen. There's no physical tachometer and speedometer anymore, and I complained about this in the Ranger, how it was like parts bin stuff from 15 years ago. They have a new screen. It looks pretty good here. The contrast levels, the legibility, all that, the configurability is pretty good. And that leads me right into the center screen for the infotainment. Everybody that I've gotten in this car, they asked, is that how this car comes from the factory? And I saw this in pictures and I couldn't believe that they did it. This has got to be one of the most half-baked, most horrible looking, poorly designed placements of a screen ever to put it in portrait mode like this. Not only that, is there is a definite color and brightness shift off axis, which means when you look dead center in the screen, it's bright, uniform, but as you move your head over to the driver position, the brightness goes down, the clarity goes down, and that's exactly why you wouldn't use a display like this in a vehicle. You'd want to either put it in landscape widescreen or use a different display technology that doesn't have that much of a shift. The second thing is, while I understand what they were trying to do here, things like the backup camera, it's hilarious. You put the backup camera on and it fills this much of the screen and you can't full screen it. And it's not, they don't understand how to use the technology that they're implementing in here. So I guess I could make an excuse for it if everything worked, but it doesn't. Again, attention to detail. All right, so there's gotta be something good here aside from these Oreos, and there is. It's comfortable. It really is. These seats are great. The massaging function somewhat works. The steering wheel has electronic control, so you can telescope, move the wheel in and out. The pedal placement's good. The storage is great. The cargo capacity and room in terms of driver room, passenger room, backseat room, and the third row is where this thing really shines. That is why you would buy this as a hauler. And I made a joke that this is kind of like that glorified U-Haul rental truck that you would buy, because if you only care about utility, you don't care about all the little details and all the other stuff, You will haul a lot of people in here comfortably, there's no doubt. But when you get past, okay, there's good placement of cargo area, the cup holders, all of that, the functionality stuff, the leather seats. These seats look like the foam is already caving in on the driver's seat. There's a wrinkle in the leather that is absolutely a defect in workmanship or materials. It feels blown out in the bolsters, and not even in a good way. It's not just a give that's in the padding. It's literally blown out, and this thing only has 4,000 miles on it. The discoloration of the seats. And then the last thing to talk about before I move on to the shop, the audio system. Bang & Olufsen is the name that they're putting on, which is a high-end brand that they've just sold the name off to. It's just a stamp with a name. And the base audio system is, I don't even know how much it is, but this is a $1,000 option in this Platinum. You have to pay $1,000 more and you get an extra couple speakers. And this is one of the absolute worst cars we've ever tested in terms of audio quality. You can hear it, whether it's Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, Bluetooth audio. There is a horrible vibration at any louder volume. The bass is boomy. The mid-range is just searing, and all the graphs support this. This is a very buzzy, cavernous, vibration-prone interior, and the audio system, spending $1,000, you'd be better off spending $1,000 on getting my back waxed for like 6 months. That would be a better use of your money than spending the money on the audio system in here. But let's head into the shop and see what's underneath. The new Ford Explorer.
Wow.
Well, you know, I haven't been that excited about too many Ford products, I gotta be honest. And then, you know, I heard a lot of bad press about this, so I was curious to see what the architecture was, how it was built underneath, how it drove in all of it.
Yeah, this is an important car for us. This is a car from Chicago.
Yes, it's made and manufactured in Ford's updated and refreshed and retooled plant where this is coming out of. And
then being fixed in Michigan.
Right, yeah. So there's some issues with that, but we'll talk about that later. The new architecture, they've gone away from a front-wheel drive, all-wheel drive platform of the old Explorer to a rear-wheel drive architecture with all-wheel drive added on.
Yeah, this is Ford's new CD6 architecture. It's currently used in the Lincoln Aviator and soon to be the new Ford Mustang. And before we get excited, the reason why its rear-wheel drive has nothing to do with dynamics, it's packaging. According to the chief engineer, the primary reason they went to rear-wheel drive architecture was supposedly towing and the cargo capacity for both passengers and things.
And the third row.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting approach. And there's certain things, obviously, you can do with rear-wheel drive architectures that you can't do with front. And one of the big reasons is definitely towing. But on paper, with the V6, this only tows a marginal amount more, but where it picks up a ton of cargo capacity compared to the old generation is the 4-popper. It goes up by like a couple thousand pounds, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
So, you know, the lower trims go up in towing and the upper trims stay similar. But I think overall, as they update this, they're going to have more and more towing capacity. There's a lot of overhead with this. And I think going forward, Ford is focused on trucks. This is definitely more truck. Speaking of it, when you look at the front suspension specifically, it struts. But what's interesting is the 2 lower control arms are enormous. So that means there's some pretty serious load capacity here, and you have 2 gigantic ball joints attached to the lower knuckle, and then the upright is steel. But this definitely has a more rugged look, and then the front sway bar is like 3 times the size of that, like of what you would see on a traditional like car-based front-wheel drive SUV.
Yeah, it's really a return to form for the Explorer as a whole. The previous generations were all basically trucks.
Yeah, yeah, and then they switched kind of the car. They're trying to do all that, and now they're back, and that's, you know, we can debate that all day long.
It's a mindset shift for Ford.
Yeah, definitely.
The next thing to bring up is the body structure, though.
There is a lot of use of materials. Like they also use magnesium in some places, and a lot of that was trying to find the balance between cost effectiveness and weight reduction. And when you're making a vehicle, you can't just, you know, otherwise it'd be composites and expensive stuff to get weight to nothing. But you know, manufacturing is expensive, so you'll see a balance. Like they have 2 lower control arms that are aluminum, and then a steel hub or knuckle. So I mean, that's the trade-offs in engineering. But let's talk quickly about the transmission, Jack.
It is Ford's 10-speed, And in this case, it has an optional hybrid system you get in the hybrid powertrain. Okay. It's interesting.
Yeah, they don't use a fixed gear, which is just a single gear, reduction gear. It's a 10-speed automatic paired with their hybrid, so you still get physical shifts with that, which we haven't driven. But, with the way this 10-speed is supposed to be very modular, and they can kind of convert it to cars, trucks, sports cars. We'll talk about the way this performs when we drive, but let's head on to the back. Jack, in the back here, what do we have?
Some fake quad-tip exhaust, Mark.
Yeah, this is interesting design, but we're seeing this a lot more. So the soot and the exhaust blow out down into the ground instead of into the car behind you, and then you have less carbon buildup or black on the exhaust tips as well as a byproduct.
It does look very corny, though.
It does look corny, but this is modern cars. What do you expect? You have an independent rear suspension, subframe, and the enormous lower control arms that are aluminum. Spring cradles and your dampers are separated from it. And then you'll just see, again, like we talked about in the front, the mix between stamped steel parts and aluminum, cost effectiveness. The knuckle in the back, however, is aluminum. And again, some of this is for load bearing, towing, strength in that way. And then you were going to talk about the exterior a little bit.
So you'd expect that Ford, with their huge aluminum works, particularly for the F-150, that they would use some aluminum in the body panels. They are not, they are steel, which is a point of contention when you realize this thing is almost $60,000.
Yeah, and it's absolutely. But again, they picked and choose where they wanted to save cost, and I think Ford knows by now who their customer is for this, and we talk about this with a lot of brands. If you have a diehard customer, they're not going to care what you do. They're just going to go buy it. And I think at some point in the design, they're just like, well, we don't really care. People are going to buy it regardless. So that's what this is. And I think in terms of the last part, all-wheel drive system, again, this is rear-wheel drive first, so you'll see it always driving the rear wheels, and then it will transition into front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive when it needs it.
Via the transfer case.
Yep. And there's a whole bunch of drive modes as well attached to that with, snow, wet, dirt, gravel. The typical stuff you're seeing in all-wheel drive systems, this is capable of doing.
Ford's big thing with this, if you read any of their marketing and their press releases, is their safety suite on this car. This is what they're pushing. They're trying to view this as a technology tour de force for Ford. Whether or not it works, we'll talk about on the drive. But
exactly. It's like most marketing. What does that mean is definitely something we'll talk about on the drive. But the last part is the engine options. I would say, to be completely honest, if you're going to buy this, just go right to the 3-liter. The 3-liter twin turbo is exactly the right amount of power to the weight, the size, and the character of driving this. When you get to those lesser motors, it's not going to feel right. The ST is going to add a whole bunch of stiff suspension to a vehicle that shouldn't have it, and I don't believe that they should be using the ST branding from the enthusiast market and carrying it over to SUVs.
I agree with you.
I know their dealerships are trying to give them away for nothing, so you'll see them on the road. People are like, oh, wow. But it's not going to ride anywhere near as good as this. Let's take this thing out on the road and see how it drives. Oh, the Ford Explorer twin turbo 3-liter V6-ticle. Oh, I gotta wait for the start-stop to kick in. Oh,
that's tough. Ford tough.
There's no fake engine noise though, bro.
You don't think so?
No. Nope. Sounds normal. That's a big positive, and that's the biggest positive about this. People talk, well, do you need the ST? No, you don't need the ST, because the 3-liter in the Platinum trim is fast. This is quick, it really is.
Yeah, it's more than adequate. It probably is one of the fastest non-premium, like in the Hondas, Toyotas, Fords, GMC piles, SUVs.
Yeah, definitely. It's noticeable. And let's talk about the drivability. This is now a rear-wheel drive architecture, rear-wheel drive first, and then it will send power to the front wheels when it needs traction. And I've had a chance to drive this in the cold and in the snow, And the stability control system and all the different drive modes that you select here, I've left it in auto, I put it in snow, I put it in deep sand. I've tried every mode, including sport, and I feel like the stability control system is a big highlight here because it does allow you enough slip angle to get this through snow or wet without plowing, like a lot of the front wheel drive competition. This really does change direction well. It feels really stable at the same time, and the traction and stability control system are flexible enough not to turn off the power.
That's really where you notice the advantages of the rear-wheel drive architecture. You don't notice it on dry pavement. You don't notice the dynamic advantage. However, when you are in inclement weather, it really does help you get through corners.
It does, a lot. So that's a huge pro to this. The tuning of the stability and all of that, the traction's great. And if you had snow tires on this thing, it would be hilariously good. But as it stands, I feel like it is really good for what this is. And I know a lot of people knock it. I have zero problem with that. The second thing is the overall drivability in terms of suspension. This feels, and I know a lot of it has to do with the wheel and tire package on the Platinum, it feels far too rough for what this is. When you hit hard pavement, potholes, divots, there is this shock, just this instant impact that you should not feel in a vehicle like this that transmits way too much vibration and shock to the driver and passengers.
It could, though, be a byproduct of the fact that we have not fully loaded this up with a 7-passenger load.
And that could be some of it, but the other competition do not have this problem. But the side effect is one of the things I really, really like about the Explorer is this feels far more substantial than any of the competition. This feels to me like a truck. It's a throwback. It feels more like an F-150. It has that more solid ride. It does not feel like a car-based SUV. This is, if you're coming from trucks and you want that truck SUV feel, this is one of the only few, if the pretty much the only one in the segment that has this level of it. It has heft, solid feeling, stability, solidity, and that is the big selling point here for me.
It's a return to form for the Ford product lineup as a whole. They really are shifting towards their truck roots. However, I do think that might be a negative in the grand scheme of things. This product, the Explorer, has come dead last in almost every single comparison test it's been entered in. And there are a lot of deficiencies. This thing does not feel finished.
It doesn't feel finished. So that's the next part. I like the ride. I like the fact that it's different. It's a truck first, and it's designed to be able to tow more, so you could tow. It has a huge amount of space on the inside. It does feel like that 15-year-old SUV product, which is good. But the bad is it's definitely nowhere near as refined anymore as all the competition, and most people that are buying these now want more refinement, and it doesn't have that. The next thing to talk about is the transmission, and that is the biggest low light of this. Probably one of the worst transmissions I've driven in the modern era. Let's take this off. Let's just put it in whatever. Really, it doesn't matter what mode you put this in. And I can't even find out what mode I'm in because it's so slow to switch drive modes with this stupid screen. Sport. So, you hear drivetrain whine from the transmission or the transfer case. That's the first thing. When this thing's cold, I seriously thought the transmission was going to grenade itself. This only has 4,000 miles on it, and the shifts go from smooth to just stupid fast, like Ferrari speed shifting with high amounts of driver shock. I mean, literally, it'll shift and it'll be like, boom! And I'm like, whoa! And it's happened to me when if the thing downshifts randomly, you kind of go half throttle, it kind of downshifts, and it's like, no, that's not the right gear. Boom! Well, I'll put it in the right gear. Or yesterday when we were driving together, I just made the mistake of trying to use the paddles to downshift. And this thing cannot rev match its downshifts, and it literally downshifted and locked up the tires. Literally locked up the tires because it downshifted so hard and so unsmooth. And to me, that's the biggest deal breaker here. I do not think that they have the transmission tuned right. I think there's something seriously wrong how they have it done. And if you drive anything other than like 10%, like 5 to 10% slow, this is really, really bad. And I there's other things I'm going to talk about in the final thoughts. But
I don't think it's indicative of the 10-speed. I think it's indicative of the tuning and the engineers involved with this project. The 10-speed in the Mustang and this, or even the F-150, is pretty reasonable. It is the same 10-speed in all of these vehicles. I do not know how they screwed it up this badly.
I think some of the transmissions are modular, so they can make subtle mechanical changes to them, from my understanding. My understanding is the transmission's modular enough so they can make some mechanical changes based on the platforms. But other than that, they have to seriously have there's got to be something mechanically wrong with the physical design of this, with the way that it's tuned, with this drivetrain specifically.
But the principal architecture is good, and that's what I mean when I said that earlier. This whole car feels like the B-grade engineers did it. Instead of having 10 or 15 senior engineers, they threw like 60 interns at this thing and let them have at it. Nothing feels... It feels like it's a project that's good enough, right? It's going to be a fleet car where you're going to sell the police departments, your utility guy.
Right.
And most people who are buying these cars don't do the necessary research to figure out what's good.
Yeah, this thing needs, the best way to put it is this thing needs to go to finishing school. It really does. They've kind of just left it incomplete. It feels like a B-team effort, a lot of it. So I said this on the interior. It's designed for somebody that is a Ford apologist. Like, you've only owned Fords, you've come from Explorers, Expeditions, Ford products, and that's all you know. You're gonna get in here and you're like, oh, this is a really good thing. But when you start driving all the competition products and you realize just how half-baked a lot of this is, I could not, in good conscience, recommend this, at least the first model year, to people just based on the things that we've talked about. And as much as I really do like it, sadly, it's weird because I know a lot of people hate this. I would take it over a lot of the competition for its truckishness. I like that, and I like the exterior. A lot of people like the exterior of this. They have a lot going for it here, but I think they were caught in two different worlds. Like you said, what is it trying to be? Is it just trying to be good enough for fleet, for rental cars, for the Ford people that don't care what they do or how they refine it? And I think that's where Ford has left it. They know people are just going to buy it regardless.
If you've liked the older Explorers, the truck-based ones with the 4.6 from the mid-2000s or 90s, you'll like this, right? It has a lot of that truckish charm. But if you're coming from a more sophisticated vehicle, or a European vehicle, or really Japanese, Korean, in this modern era where this class is so competitive, there are probably 20 different SUVs you can buy for this much money that are, in my opinion, potentially better.
That's really a good point, and a great time, great place to get into the final thoughts to talk about the pricing and some of the other details we didn't talk about during the other parts of this review. Final thoughts on the new Ford Explorer. You've seen the interior, the exterior, the underbody on the driving segment. You've heard the pros and the cons, and this may surprise you. I really like this SUV a lot. I like it for various reasons. The main thing is it has a presence to it. It has this sense of solidness or solidity to it. It feels like a truck. If you're coming from trucks or you're a big truck person and you're looking for an SUV, this is going to be a huge treat for you. In fact, I would say you have to drive the competitors' products at this point. There's so many good SUVs out there, but one of the things you're gonna find is every single company is trying to over-refine the experience to the point where they just feel like big cars, and they feel like big cars are big minivans, and that's it. You don't feel much. The Explorer still feels substantial, and that would be great, and I would say go out and look at it, but things do not work right on this thing at all. And they don't work right in just little ways like the infotainment or the screens or little buzzes and rattles. This thing has legitimate drivetrain issues, transmission problems, transmission logic problems, ride quality issues. It has horrible resonance from the rear part of the car where you feel pressure in your ears. The sound system is horrible. And the biggest thing, the biggest problem with it, could be engineering, it could be the people, personnel problems. I truly believe the biggest issue is Ford's corporate structure or corporate management. They have so much pressure to produce. They've cut cars out of their lineup in America, and now they have to figure out how to have a product-based, Ford's still a product-driven brand, how to get trucks and SUVs selling a cajillion of them. So in the case of the Explorer, It's built in Chicago, and that's important to me because it's in Illinois. We need jobs. The state is doing horrendous financially, so jobs are important. So Ford invested over $1 billion in our plant in Chicago to retool it, gut it, and they did this in a year. I mean, it's unprecedented, the scale that the scope of this project, and to try to get a high volume product out of this factory in a year, it hasn't worked. In fact, they're still dealing with personnel issues, quality issues, with not only production, QC, everything that has to go into building a car has been problematic, and it's not good for a high volume thing like the Explorer. The biggest problem, shit rolls downhill, and I've worked in big companies like this. Senior management, executive level teams have to answer to shareholders. They have to answer to financial concerns, restructuring concerns. And what reality is over here doesn't align with reality and what it takes to build a car and all the people and all the moving parts in between. And trying to ramrod the Explorer through an accelerated production process, a new factory, it's taken its toll. And when I said shit rolls downhill, it rolls downhill to you as the customer buying this. And that's why I would say you're gonna have to wait at least 2 years if you want a new Explorer to be safe, because you certainly don't wanna be stuck with the internal dilemmas and problems of a company of like where Ford is right now. And I'm just trying to be straight with you. If you still wanna buy it, I like it a lot, but you just need to know what you're getting into before you sign on the dotted line. Thanks for watching. See you next time.